Hey everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of How'd You Like That Movie? Unfortunately, Scott is still away due to that tragic death in his family. But as we talked about on our last show, the show must go on. And luckily for us, we have our good friend, Mary Galloway, indigiqueer filmmaker, who's going to actually walk us through a fantastic guest that she's going to introduce. Mary, welcome to the show yet again, now as a co-host. You're already climbing that ladder. Soon you're going to be replacing me.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks for having me. Super happy to be here. Even more excited because we have the incredible powerhouse Elle-Máijá Tailfeathers, writer, director, producer, actor. She's Indigenous. She's taken kind of the film industry by storm in all of her things. And so I'm just so excited to be here and talk about Slashback.
Which is also like a fantastic, would you refer to as an Indigenous because they're Inuit? How do you guys classify it? Or how do you classify it?
I guess, yeah, like Inuit would be the more specific way, I think. But maybe Elle-Máijá will know better because I don't know the director personally. We actually, Maya, the director, and Jennifer Podemsky and I were all at a DGC dinner chatting. So I met her briefly, but I don't know the director's lineage, but it is set in like Inuit territory, right?
Correct, absolutely. Yeah. Before we start talking about the show and we talk with our guest, why don't you, what about you? What have you been doing since we last chatted? Because you're, you're a Canadian Screen Award nominee as well, twice. You were not successful, but who cares? That's amazing. What have you been doing since then?
Yeah, so I am in post-production right now for a new APTN digital series for Lumi, their digital platform. It's like a sci-fi dramedy, I would say, and it's called D.H. And I co-directed that with my lovely Indigenous friend, Miigwyn Fairbrother. And so we're in post-production for that. Is probably going to come out towards the end of the year, what we're thinking. And then I'm in kind of pre-prep for a feature documentary about the couch and sweater, the knitted legacy that the couch and sweaters are. And I'm from the Cowichan Nation, and it's a very, very meaningful story that I'm really excited to get to tell. I'm in development for a new Crave series. I'm doing the CBC Academy executive residency program. Kind of have a lot of plates spinning in the air, but a lot of prep and post, nothing in production at the moment.
Are you done acting, basically?
No, the funny thing is that I really don't book acting work as your typical actor does. I will audition, but I'll very rarely get roles through auditions. It's mostly like Miigwyn, he asked me to co-direct and he's like, and I have a role for you. So I was like, okay. So I acted in that web series I just did. It's mostly just friends who will be like, hey, you want to come act? And I'll be like, yeah, sure. Or I write myself roles. So I love acting. I will always take an acting role if I feel called to it. But writing and directing is really what I'm like focusing my time on, and then acting when an opportunity kind of presents itself.
And speaking of the couch and sweater, I lived in Victoria for 12 years. I love those sweaters. Those sweaters are awesome. I think that especially if you actually get an authentic one, like you can have it your entire life. You literally, you could pass the thing on. Like it's the most indestructible sweater ever.
Yeah, I've got my great grandpa's sweater. It's pretty in great condition, other than the zipper needs to get re-sewn back on, but they last for decades. And the knitters right now, as it is, are making about $2 an hour on the sweaters, and the wool is just impossible to source on the island. So it's a whole issue that they could become extinct eventually if we don't do something about it. So yeah.
So and before we move off that topic, is there a way to ensure that you, as you know, there's a lot of like fakes, right? Because they are such a, like, is there a way to like ensure you are, so first off, that the Indigenous creators are actually getting the money, not someone else, and that it's legit? Is there a way to kind of source that properly?
It's about where you buy it, really. People should be buying it directly from knitters or directly from Indigenous owned and operated businesses. Likely, like if you find one at like kind of fashion store, it's gonna be a fake. I can tell because I've been around them my whole life by just looking at them, holding them, looking at the wool, the zippers, the way it's built is like very specific to the couch and sweater. They're all in one piece. There's no like sewing on the arms or sewing on the collar. They're knit in one piece, and it's like very unique to the couch and sweater.
Do you have any links that we could possibly throw in our show notes to where to purchase these things properly?
Yeah, I mean, I can give you my Aunt Dora's Facebook page. She's always knitting and selling them, and the documentary will have a lot of info on that too. And when that gets going, we should do this again.
Absolutely, absolutely. I love it. I love it. I love it. You know, we call it shameless self-promotion. That's what we do on the show. Okay, like, do you want to do? I'm so excited to talk to her. So, you ready to do this?
Let's do this.
All right, bring her on.
All right, let's welcome Elle-Máijá Tailfeathers, everyone. She has been killing it out there in the industry, taking it over, telling the most authentic, genuine, heartfelt, moving, exciting stories. Everything that Elle-Máijá does, I watch. I am big fan and friend and community member. We cross paths here and there, and every time it's always lovely. So welcome, Elle-Máijá Tailfeathers. Woo!
Hi, thank you so much for that super generous and kind introduction. Yeah, it's really nice to be here. I'm happy that we were able to make it happen, and also really happy to be speaking with Mary in particular today. So I'm also a big fan of Mary and her work, and I think she's a really, really important voice within not only the Indigenous film community, but more broadly in Canada. She's also a bit of like I don't like to use the term trailblazer because I feel like that's like some weird like settler colonial reference or something, but like she's like forged her own path, which is really admirable, and so much respect for Mary. So anyway, happy to be here.
So before we actually get into your body of work, which is extensive, is there anything that you are super excited to talk about right now? Do you have a second season of, it's 3 Pines, right? Not 2 Pines, right?
3 yeah, it's 3 Pines. I don't know. Amazon has us just waiting. I wish I knew, but yeah, as of right now, nobody knows if there's going to be a second season. So yeah,
my mom wants a second season, so I don't know, maybe if that works with Amazon. Like Chris's mom says that there needs to be a second season because she really likes the show.
A lot of moms like the show, including mine, so
that's just my mom too.
Yeah, moms love the show, so I mean that's a big market in and of itself. So I'm hoping that they move forward with the second season. It was a lot of fun to shoot and wonderful to work with Alfred Molina and the rest of the cast, but also just to work with Tracy Deer, who's a really phenomenally talented Mohawk director. Yeah, so fingers crossed it gets a second season. I don't know. Right now I'm kind of just like waiting in the void like everybody else.
So Tracy Deer, I mean, Beans is, we did it on our show. We basically said, I don't know why they're not showing this in school. It's like what Schindler's List is to the Holocaust. It's such a, especially because you get to see it from the side of not the French Canadian side, right? And you just get to see that venomous racism. It's such a moving film. It's beautifully done. What's it like to work with her as a director, though? Like what's her style? We're gonna actually pick on it. I want to talk to you about a lot of the directors that you have worked with, because you have worked with the best Indigenous directors in the business, which also makes them some of the best directors in the business. So
yeah, that was kind of one of the reasons I decided to do 3 Pines. Often just like Mary, I don't really book auditions, like gigs from auditions. It like never happens.
One of those actually. I don't
Literally
audition.
like maybe book 1%, if that, of the stuff I auditioned for. So yeah, it's just like, okay, I'm not gonna get this, whatever, I'll do it as long as I have fun. I'll send in this self-tape. But generally, I think just like Mary, I had to kind of start making my own work. And the work that I do get as an actor is generally through other Indigenous directors. So yeah, people like Jeff Barnaby and Dennis Goulet have considered me. And I think Tracy kind of maybe had some influence in me booking Three Pines. I went through the audition process, and I was really sort of conflicted about the idea of playing a police officer, just given the relationship and history of policing in Canada and Indigenous people. But then, you know, I saw that Tracy was directing and that she'd had a fair amount of input in terms of helping with scripts. She didn't write, but she definitely offered a lot of feedback. So working with her was phenomenal. You know, it's a big Amazon Prime show, so there's a big budget, and it's definitely the largest sort of mainstream set I've been on, and it was incredible to witness this Indigenous woman just like own her power and her craft and run the show. And she was so generous in terms of her feedback as a director with the actors. Like, she's definitely an actor's director. We would do take after take after take, just trying different ways of approaching the scene, and she had very specific things in mind, which I really appreciate. I love the process of collaborating, and often I just like to work with directors for the sake of watching how they work, so that I can hopefully, you know, implement some of that into my own craft as a director.
I was gonna say, I bet you're also an actor's director, having your experience, which to me is like also how I am, and those are my favorite directors to work with, because sometimes directors are speaking a whole other language to the actors, and the actors are speaking a different language to the director, and it's just like a, what do you want from me kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And performance informs so much of the story. And I, you know, often I think that kind of gets lost in translation in terms of, you know, what goes on screen. There's so much that goes into the aesthetic and the look and the feel. And sometimes the performance aspect of it can really get lost. And so it's wonderful to work with directors who are really focused on the craft of acting and ensuring that the actors are landing all of those notes in terms of the story and moving everything forward. And Tracy's definitely like that.
Do you notice a difference between direction for feature film versus direction for episodic television?
Yeah. TV has to move so fast, you know, it's kind of like it's its own sort of beast. Whereas with independent film, it's a different experience, and it's coming much more from a singular voice in a sense. So and that's kind of been a thing that I've learned to adjust to in this last year with directing drama for television, is that you don't have the final say as the director. You know, there's showrunners, there's producers, there's the network, and they ultimately have the final say. So there's the director's cut, but then it goes on to others. And so in terms of the process as an actor working on a television set, it's very different from that of a feature film, because when you're working with the director, you know that it's their vision that you're specifically working toward. Whereas in television, it's also a whole lot of other people who are influencing the choices that are being made on screen.
So you also mentioned kind of some of the top, like Jeff Barnaby. Is it Denise Goulet? How do you say your name?
Dennis.
Okay. And then obviously Tracy. So between them, did they have similar directing styles, or like, can you talk about the directing styles of each one of them? Because again, these are all very, very good directors, award-winning directors. And yeah, so.
Yeah, well, you know, I just want to say, like, I think, like so many people, was really affected by the passing of Jeff Barnaby. He was, you know, a true visionary in our field and really helped shape the landscape of Indigenous cinema. Rhymes for Young Ghouls, which I was not in, but I remember seeing at the Imaginative Film Festival back in, I think it was like 2013 or 2014. That film was a landmark feature film for Indigenous cinema. Like it definitely changed the game for all of us. For one, at the time, it was the biggest budget ever given to, I think, an Indigenous feature. And that's something we were fighting for so long, getting equitable access to resources so that we could make the films that we wanted to make and not work with sort of just like, crumbs from the pie. And he really pushed his craft and truly owned it in that film. So I watched it and I left feeling just so deeply moved because I knew that things were going to change for the rest of us as well in a good way. And so yeah, working with Jeff was a tremendous honor. I wasn't expecting to work with him on Blood Quantum. He sent me the script and it was like nothing I'd ever read before because like it's like there's Forrest Goodluck's character who plays my son like takes a dump off of a bridge onto a car and I'm like, what am I reading? And then I get into it and it's this like beautifully politicized almost satire in some ways, and then also just like so violent, but also violent in the sense that it sort of puts a mirror up to settler society here in Canada and reflects back that violence that we as Indigenous people experience every day and have since contact. So it was just such a wild ride, and I wasn't expecting to work with him, and I had no idea what to expect when I read the script, and then I just knew I just wanted to work with Jeff and watch him work and learn from him. And he knew what he wanted. He'd worked on that script for, I think he'd worked on it for like a decade. He tried to get it made as his first feature. And he'd said that it just seemed like Canada wasn't ready for a film like that quite yet. And so he ended up making Rhymes for Young Ghouls first.
So Jeff, from watching his work, looked like a very meticulous filmmaker. Like I said, and the fact that you referred to him as like a movie nerd, like kind of like the Indigenous. Actually, he's Mi'kmaq, wasn't he?
Yeah, Jeff was Mi'kmaq, from Listuguj or Restigouche, as it's also known. Yeah, every single scene in that film was, shot listed, and he had very specific ideas in mind for the framing, everything. So it was a very meticulous process. It was very ambitious. Like even the fact that he was working with this, quote unquote large budget, but it really wasn't. It was still a very small budget.
I think it's like what, 5 million or something like that, which as we know is like a micro budget in the feature film world, right? So
exactly, but for Indigenous film, that at the time it was considered a big deal. And he, it was a very ambitious project to make for that amount of money, and he was so committed to ensuring that his vision stayed true throughout the entire process. And yeah, he was like nobody I've ever really worked with before. And sometimes he was a tyrant, and sometimes he was difficult, but that was just his nature. And ultimately he had a good heart and a deep commitment to getting the story right, and he truly loved his people and where he came from and his language. And it was honestly just such a beautiful experience to be able to visit his community and shoot in his community. And he made sure that the whole cast went and visited the local school. So all of the kids from that community, from like kindergarten to grade 12, came and hung out with us in the high school gym, and we got to do like a really fun Q&A with them. And I knew that Jeff had everything to do with facilitating that and ensuring that his community was benefiting from this experience and from this project.
Mary, have you seen Blood Quantum?
Oh yeah, I saw it at Imaginative, and it was so badass. And then I also remember Jeff saying that he scored it as well.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
It's wild to me. And he edited it, I think. He like
Yeah.
wrote, directed, edited, scored, like everything. Like
So
what?
he's like John Carpenter basically for Halloween, like just did all the jobs.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, and
Yeah.
you know, he comes from that like school of independent filmmaking where you do everything, you know, and I think he continued to do that as a feature director.
I
And
also remember Rhymes for Young Ghouls when the auditions were happening for that. And I was like, I think I was still in acting school, or maybe I was a like recent graduate and I auditioned for it. And I remember thinking just like, wait, there's a cool like female young badass like indigenous character I can audition for. This has never happened to me before. Like this is so like different. Yeah, it was just I think one of the first auditions I ever did where I was like really excited to just audition for a role that wasn't your like sort of stereotypical like indigenous, like all of the indigenous roles I had been auditioning for at that time were like the victims that were like for me and like just very like one-dimensional. And that I just remember that getting that audition was like a game changer for sure, because it was like, oh, there are going to be roles for me that I can play a dynamic, or I'll audition for a dynamic indigenous female character and not just be the like the archetype of an indigenous woman, you know?
yeah, absolutely.
So you also then went and worked on Night Raiders, which is also a fairly decent budget. Did very well. They went to con with it. You again, Canadian Screen Awards. Both of you two have been to the Canadian Screen Awards. You have won a ton of Canadian Screen Awards. But what was it like working with her as a director?
It was one of the best experiences of my life, truly. Janice also spent a long time working on the script. She had a lot of her own work going on with advocacy for Indigenous film. Like she was very much involved with changing the landscape for Indigenous cinema. So she was behind a really important report that came from Imaginative. Her and Carrie Swanson, who now runs the Indigenous Screen Office, did this massive report quite a few years ago that sort of looked at the barriers that Indigenous filmmakers face in terms of getting from making shorts to making features, because it was this like major gap for us. There were so many of us who were making short films and then not making that natural transition to directing features. And so they did this report that made it so evident that Canadian funders were not giving us equitable access to the same resources that general Canadian filmmakers were getting. And because of that report and so much other advocacy, Telefilm changed the way that they worked. The CMF did, the NFB did. So it really garnered a massive shift for us. And so Janice was busy working on that kind of stuff while writing her feature. So eventually she took the time to direct Night Raiders, and it was such an incredible experience because she really challenged the way that we make films in Canada. You know, so often mainstream cinema works in this kind of like toxic hierarchical way, and there's a real sort of like lack of community-based work, and there's also this like idea that the director is this like visionary auteur who calls all the shots. But Janice was very much collaborative. She worked from a community-based perspective, and she ensured that there was cultural and spiritual support on set, because we were obviously telling a really, really difficult story. And her kids were often on set, which was such a special thing for me, and I think so many others. You know, in Indigenous communities and Indigenous gatherings, there's always like multiple generations present, and children are welcomed and cherished and loved in these spaces. And so often in non-Indigenous spaces, there's not really like a an allowance for children and a celebration of what they bring to a community. And so to see Danis bring her kids to set was really special, knowing that we're talking about this history of forced removal and, you know, theft of our children from our communities. And then in addition to that, the film was the first international Indigenous co-production. So they worked with Maori producers from New Zealand. So it was a New Zealand-Canadian co-production, but on a deeper level, it was like a Cree Maori co-production, which was really special. So we had
Taika Waititi, right?
yeah, which Taika Waititi and Chelsea Winstanley, and many others were involved in that. So it was really special just to be involved in this project that was one of many projects changing the way that we work. And that certainly informed every aspect of the filmmaking process and the decisions that were made and the way that we work together. So it inherently like placed us in a space of respect and care. And it was also just like so much fun. Like there was so much laughter on set, which is so important given the nature of the story we were telling. So it was really special to know that like in between takes we could joke around and laugh with each other and like feel joy despite the fact that we were telling a very difficult story. And yeah, Danis knew exactly what she wanted. She was like fully in her power as a director, but was in no way like forceful about it. Like she was very collaborative and would offer so much in terms of being an actor's director. You know, every take was different, and she was so willing to try new things.
I mean, sorry, go ahead, Mary. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, and I know on that one, Violet Nilsson was an actor, and that's someone that you had worked with before on The Body Members When the World Broke Open.
Yeah.
And she is like a shining, emerging young star in the Indigenous acting world. Like Violet is one of my favorite Indigenous actors I've seen on screen, and I just wanted to like highlight that she was in that as well as your first feature that you directed.
Thank you. Yeah, I woke up thinking about Violet this morning. That's so weird. I should probably reach out to her. But yeah.
Yeah, I want to reach out to her too. I wonder how she's doing.
She was literally like in my thoughts when I woke up. Yeah, she's so phenomenally talented, and we found Violet through an open casting call. Her mom kind of like convinced her to come and audition for The Body Remembers, and that film would not be what it is if it weren't for Violet's contribution and her performance. Like watching her is so captivating, and she's like I don't know, she's truly like this old soul who takes such a nuanced approach to all of her choices and makes really different choices. And she's just so compelling to watch. And so, yeah, it was wonderful to work with her in Night Raiders. She's hilarious and like plays practical jokes on everybody all the time. And becomes everybody's best friend. So yeah, she was wonderful to work with, and I'm so happy that Danis cast her. And I really hope that Violet continues to work as an actor in this industry, because she has so much to offer.
Yeah.
So The Body Remembers When the World Broke Open, correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
That's an intense film. So is it true you guys shot it on 16 millimeter?
Yeah, we did.
And you like, it's excessively long takes. Like it's almost shot in a Hitchcockian to give you the feeling of like no editing. And so there's this intensity to it. I was just like reviewing it this morning before the show, and that first scene where you enter with you were just talking about it. Yes, thank you. Where you're like, hey, like, is that your boyfriend? Blah, blah, blah. And then so you're moving her down the streets, and the camera looks like it's like shoulder mounted, so it's bouncing around, and the take is super long, and so it almost you feel that anxiousness of like, we gotta go down this alley, we gotta do this. It's beautiful. It is a fucking phenomenal film. You guys did an amazing job on that thing.
Thank you. Yeah, we had an incredible team. I directed that with Kathleen Hepburn, and Norm Lee was our cinematographer. And Jeremy Cox was our focus puller. I feel like not enough people mention Jeremy in terms of his skill as a focus puller, because we shot it on 16 millimeter and we did it as a continuous take, but that's impossible to do with 16 millimeter because the camera mags are only 11 minutes long. So we rehearsed to the point where we choreographed 11 different camera transitions. So there would be a camera preloaded and rolling that would be swapped out onto Norm's shoulder at 11 different points throughout this continuous take. So we would keep going performance-wise and everything. We wouldn't cut. And then we did that once a day for 5 days, and then stitched together the best sort of takes from those 11 different, I guess it's 12 different segments throughout the film. And so that also involved 5 days of like full crew rehearsal to get everything down pat, because we had, I think, 6 or 7 different locations. So we treated it like theater. Violet had never acted before, and we wanted to offer her as much support as possible, given both the content and just the fact that she was a young actor. She was 17 at the time. And so we did 4 weeks of rehearsal in like kind of like a rehearsal space like theater, and then we mapped out the locations with masking tape on the floor and rehearsed everything as though it was a play. And then when we got to the point where everything was fully off book and we felt like we'd kind of worked through every beat of the script with Violet, we moved into full crew rehearsal in the actual locations. So we did 5 days of just running through the whole film over and over and over again. And then finally got to the point where we could film. And yeah, there's this kind of like magical tension in terms of like the possibility of failure. And with film, you don't often get that, because you know that you can just yell cut and start over, do something over again. But when you're not allowing for that, there's sort of this like deep focus and concentration that everybody has to sort of hone in on. And it also allows for improvisation. So if something goes wrong, we have to respond to it as though it's like a natural thing. And so there were plenty of moments when we were actually recording where unexpected things happened and we had to improvise and just roll with it. And it creates this like really beautiful kind of natural space for performance. And yeah, and Kathleen and I wanted, and you've worked with Kathleen as well, Mary. Kathleen and I wanted to create the same sort of feeling of not necessarily entrapment, but feeling of not being able to escape this moment with these two women. And so that was also kind of our choice with this whole continuous take thing. And Norm Lee, who's such a talented cinematographer, was insistent that we work with film. He'd like made this like personal commitment to himself that like the next feature project he worked on would be on film. And of course we wanted to work with film, but we were like, how are we going to do this with a continuous take? And so Norm invented what he calls real-time transitions. So that was those 12 or 11 different transitions. Norm called
pretty
them
hidden, right? Like they weren't obvious transitions. And also Norm was the DP on the one I did with Kathleen too, Never Steady, Never Still, and it was also on film. And it is a whole other vibe on set when everyone knows that there's only so much film to shoot with, and like hopefully no one messes anything up, because you can't go again 100 times. Like you just can't. It's limited resources. And yeah, he's an incredible DP. And I think it was the same focus puller too. What was his name again?
Jeremy Cox.
Jeremy Cox. Yeah, I think it was Jeremy Cox too, who, like, that's got to be the most terrifying job of all when you're dealing with film, is if you don't get the focus right, you're not going to know it until weeks later when it's developed. So
Yeah, it was quite the process. And yeah, he did a phenomenal job, especially in those long takes where we're like walking down the street and Norm is trying to keep up with us with the shoulder or the camera on his shoulder, and we're jumping in and out of cars and going up and down stairs. Like it's pretty wild what everybody accomplished. And we had this incredible sound department as well. Like at one point we had, I think our sound recordist had 11 or 12 labs rolling all at once as well. So he was managing so much and was running behind us most of the time with the boom. And yeah, it was such a wild experience. And I would do it again in a heartbeat.
So both of you have actually co-directed projects. So my question to both of you is, why do you choose to co-direct, and there's the obvious challenges, but like, what are the challenges and how do you manage the challenges? But first off, to both of you, why co-direct?
I co-directed with Miguel because he asked me to, and I loved the story. I loved the vision. I love when actors want to pursue writing and directing, and I have gone on that really tough journey of making that transition. And it was Miguel's, I think, first time really directing something that length, and I wanted to be a support to my friend and serve the story and the vision as best I could, and to support an Indigenous creative who is making that leap from performing to behind the camera. Like it's a tough transition, and especially because he was the star of it, and I've done that where you're the actor, writer, director, and it's such a tough role to play. So I like, it definitely depends on who would ask me, but I want to support the people that I care about and who are in the community. So that's why I co-directed the series recently with Miguel.
I really try and resist this idea that like directing is about just being, an auteur and having this singular vision, because film is like truly a collaborative medium. There are so many people that contribute invaluable knowledge and talent and resources. Film crews are massive, and so often those people who contribute something so important get kind of like left behind, and there's this idea that the director is, the end all and be all behind anything, and that's just simply not true. And I truly appreciate the process of collaboration, because I feel like it just makes the material richer. It makes it better. I feel like in working with others who I respect and admire, I can learn from them and they can learn from me. And with The Body Remembers When the World Broke Open, Kathleen was a dear friend for years before that, and someone whose work I just deeply respected and admired. Never Steady, Never Still is like still one of my favorite films. It's such a profoundly beautiful, quiet, moving film, and Mary does such a phenomenal job as an actor in that. But yeah, I just knew that in working with Kathleen, we could come up with this collaborative vision along with our really talented crew, and make something that, would outlast the legacy of something I could just make on my own. I'm reading Billy Ray Balcourt's novel, A Minor Chorus. I was reading it on the airplane last night, and there's this like really beautiful little segment in that novel where he talks about how art, particularly Indigenous art, is about the collective. It's about a conversation with your community. It's about a conversation with the audience, and how it's important to resist the I in sovereignty, in terms of thinking about, like I'm thinking about film and narrative sovereignty and what it means to tell a story as an Indigenous person. For me, it's about working collectively and collaboratively, because that's how we work as communities. And so I try and think about that in anything I make. It's about collaboration, it's about respecting others' visions, and it's about listening to those you're working with and respecting them and their input, because so often it just makes what you're making so much stronger. And Sarah Polley actually talks about that a lot as well in her work, and I found it really interesting to talk about that with her on her latest feature, Women Talking, and her process in terms of just resisting this idea of the director being this like singular vision and the auteur, when really it's not that at all, and it shouldn't be that. And collaboration and co-directing is such a wonderful process.
Before we, actually get to the film, like I said, I could listen to you guys talk about film all day. You also have an amazingly powerful documentary. I'm not even it's The Meaning of Empathy, and then there's a word that I'm not even gonna try and pronounce. So can you talk about that? Like, that's again, and what brought you to making that specific documentary? Because it is so important right now. I'm a big advocate of all the stuff in that documentary: harm reduction, decriminalization. The war on drugs is a failure, in my opinion. So yeah, if you could just even give us that title, because I'm not going to
try. So it's Gimmabi Bitsin, The Meaning of Empathy, and Gimmabi Bitsin is a Blackfoot word that it's essentially one of our core values, which means that we survive as a people in and through empathy for one another, that we have to take care of each other as a community, and that's how we've survived so much, and that's how we continue to move forward as a people. And Gimmabi Bitsin is about my community's response to the overdose or opioid crisis. I come from Ghana, or the KAINAI First Nation, also known as the Blood Reserve in southern Alberta. It's the largest reserve in Canada in terms of land mass. And we were hit by the opioid crisis in 2014. And my mother is a physician practicing at home on reserve. And I would hear about everything that she was experiencing in her work, and I was witnessing what was happening in my community. And I knew that as a filmmaker, I had some obligation to document what was happening in the community, in particular because so much of what was presented in the news media was kind of like through this trauma porn lens, sort of this like lens of tragedy and trauma, and framing us simply as victims, and looking at the pain aspect of the story, and not so much highlighting all of the incredible work that was happening in the community. Like, there was so much community mobilization, so many people learning about harm reduction and kind of navigating the difficult conversation of what harm reduction can look like, and if it is necessary. I think it is, and many people do. And so I felt this sort of obligation to document all of that, to sort of put in the archive, in the sense that, like, I just wanted people to know that my community was working so hard to solve this problem, and we're so much more than our pain and our trauma. And when I started, I knew like so little about harm reduction. I think I was kind of entry level understanding, like probably most people out there. And so I had a lot of like unlearning to do, and I spent a year just researching and sitting with people. I probably interviewed at least 50 people in my community, and then people who work on the front lines with harm reduction services and policies, and came to this much deeper understanding that harm reduction is truly about just having empathy for people who are struggling with substance abuse disorder. And it's about meeting people where they're at, and it's about saving lives and giving people the opportunity to, pick themselves up again and try again, and to do so with the support of community and family. And so, yeah, that film ended up being like a 5-year-long journey. And it's kind of like, I thought about it as like a conversation with my community, because as the filmmaker, I had this like immense power in terms of editorial choice And that's something I really tried to resist in the process, was to like think about how I can do this in a way that's more grounded in my teachings as a Blackfoot person and not as a documentary filmmaker. So how can I approach this process and truly reflect the multitude of voices and experiences and opinions within my community, rather than just simply telling this monolithic story that came from my own perspective. And so in sitting with so many people in my community, I started to realize that there were so many different experiences and voices and opinions on these issues. And I felt like, okay, if I can try and turn this into like kind of a conversation amongst all of these people, it will offer the audience the same sort of learning journey that I've experienced, which is that, you know, there isn't one singular voice, there isn't one singular approach to how we treat this issue, and everybody's experiences and opinions are valid, and that's how we move forward through, you know, complicated but very important dialogue. And so, yeah, I tried to think about the film that way, less about like me as a filmmaker coming in and, you know, showing this difficult issue, and more about me as a community member coming in and using my resources to allow other people space to speak and to share their experiences, and hopefully dialogue with one another on screen over a 4-year period.
I feel like that approach is very much a part of the kind of movement that's starting to happen, that still needs a lot more movement, but in decolonizing the film industry, because it's a very colonial system that we have in filmmaking, and it's very toxic and it's unhealthy, and it's not at all like you were saying with the having kids on set, like that's decolonizing the film set, like having kids running around and having elders on set, and not being the like auteur, like my vision, this is the only way that this story can be told, like having it be a more collaborative and community-based approach, I feel like is such a important part of decolonizing the way we tell stories on Turtle Island and in the colonial Canada system.
Do you guys both feel that, sorry to cut you off, do you guys both feel that we are moving away from that auteur director? Like, is it happening, and is it happening fast enough?
Yes and no. I think like if you look at, I mean, this is America, I'm talking about the Academy Awards, all of the directors who were nominated are men. And there were so many women this year who.
Well, what about Sarah Polley?
She wasn't nominated as a director.
Oh yeah, her best pick, she got the best pick was go to producer. It's correct. Yeah.
So in terms of the, you know, the position of director, there's still this kind of like, I think it comes from a very like sort of like male-centric world that still kind of dominates film, which is that there's this like, if you're really flashy with your craft, rather than maybe taking a more gentle approach that's more about story and creating something that you know, that moves people in a different way, you're not necessarily rewarded in the same way. And so, yeah, I think it is changing in some ways. I think it's changing in terms of Indigenous cinema. There's so many people out there doing incredible work and changing the way that we work and consistently reinventing the process and implementing approaches that are much more specific to where they come from, to their community, to and to the specific story that they're telling. You know, each project is going to be different, and it's going to require sort of a different approach. And I can certainly say with Indigenous cinema that's happening. But I do think the mainstream industry has a long ways to go. And also I think Canadian funders in particular are still kind of like adapting and responding to this different approach of filmmaking, and kind of like having to learn with us as we go.
Yeah, I think it's happening. It's not happening quick enough, and it's happening from the bottom up, which is the like most grueling way to do it. Because I am finding myself butting up against the like bigger production companies that I would like to work with, but their idea of how we would work together is very much like, we have to do 15-hour days. We have to hire the people who have the experience, because there's a lot of money on the line and we know they're going to be able to do their job right. And it's like, no, but we need to create opportunities. We need to bring up people who are really good at what they do. They just haven't had the chance to show it. And I'm getting pushback a lot, like no matter who I'm talking to, when it's bigger production companies or networks or whatever, where it's like, yeah, but couldn't we like do that training and like mentorship and shadowing for the smaller stuff, but like we can't give the bigger roles or bigger like head department jobs to inexperienced people. But it's the only experienced people, the majority of them are cis, hetero, white, able-bodied, male, like demographics. So there's like just not a lot of movement from the top down, which is really frustrating.
So you end up with a feedback loop, right? Like the key jobs go to the key people, which are the same people that the key jobs go to, and the wheel keeps on turning. We go, why are we getting no progress?
Yeah. And the things that are happening are like internships, apprenticeships, shadowing, and there's only so much shadowing a girl can do.
It doesn't pay your bills. You can't eat shadowing, right? So
it's mostly for me that I have so many ideas and opinions when I'm shadowing. I'm like, I would do it like this. So I'm here to listen and watch. So yeah, that's it's just tough when it's not the decision makers that are making the changes.
Yeah, absolutely.
So before we move to Slashback, I have one more question for you. Is there a way to watch your short film Rebel? I couldn't find it. Like I could find the trailer, but I could never find the like full thing to purchase or whatever.
Yeah, I should really try and make that available somehow. Yeah, it's I think this SÁMI Film, which is a streaming platform out of Norway through the SÁMI Film Institute. I think they offer it as like a rental. It's charged as Norwegian krona, so it looks like it's a lot more than it actually is. To stream it,
$3,000.
yeah, but it's actually like, I think it's like, I don't even, it's like the equivalent of like maybe like $10 or something. I don't know. But it's a 14-minute kind of like hybrid doc about my family and my father's experience going through the SÁMI boarding school system in Norway, Sweden, and Finland. Much like Canada and the United States, they had boarding schools specifically for SÁMI children, which were about assimilation and removing SÁMI children from community. And that experience was very harmful for him and led to like a lifetime of struggles. And you know, I experienced intergenerational trauma in very real, tangible ways. And so the film is about that, but it's also about love and intergenerational strength and you know, my deep admiration and respect for my parents and everything that they'd been through. Yeah, and that was actually thanks to Danis Goulet that film was made, because it was part of the Imaginative Embargo Collective project, and so she helped us make those films. She was behind that project. So yeah. Anyway, I guess to answer your question, I think it's available maybe through the SÁMI Film streaming platform.
I'll try it. I think I maybe saw it and it had like 200 or something. And I was like, what? $200 to rent a movie? What the heck? It's a short.
Norwegian krona. So the conversion makes it like a lot less than you think it is. It's like maybe like $5 to $10 or something. I don't know. I should know, but I don't.
Mary, you got anything else before we actually get to the film we're supposed to be talking about?
Oh, do I have anything else? Like, just in general to talk about, or
with her or whatever? Like, this is the problem. Like, both you guys are super interesting and super talented. Like, we could just talk. I could just run like multiple podcasts just with you two, right? So
yeah, no, I mean, I want to dig into Slashback.
All right. Well, yeah, guys, take it away. So do you pronounce her name Nyla Innuksuk?
Innuksuk, yeah.
Okay, that was close.
Nyla is Inuk on her father's side, and then her mother is a settler Canadian.
Okay. So what do you guys think of this film?
I loved it. That's why I want to talk about it.
So good.
This is actually our so we actually covered it. I was telling Mary before you jumped on. We did a bunch of shows for Reconciliation Month. So we had Jeff Barnaby. We did Rhymes for Young Ghouls. We did Beans. We did this one. Did another one. I just can't remember which one. And I loved it because Scott's really into horror. So he was like, wow, I liked it, but like, I wish the monster was better, but whatever. But in general, we loved it. It was like The Thing meets Stranger Things or The Goonies. I actually would love to see this as almost like a Scooby-Doo style like show where like every week they go and fight monsters, and at the end we find out it's just like a white capitalist, doing bad stuff.
Yeah, I think it's such an important film for so many reasons. I was thinking about it yesterday, and I think it's so remarkable that Inuit youth who are facing so much hardship and I'm sure when they turn on the news, all they see is sad stories about their communities, about lack of housing, about suicide epidemics, about a lack of access to basic resources like affordable food, all of these things. I think it's so special that they can turn to this film and see this beautiful representation of their people, of their community, their culture, their language. That's essentially like a beautiful like underdog hero story, where Inuit technology and language and all of those things are celebrated and ultimately win. I think it's so important for youth to be able to see these types of representations of themselves on screen and in a way that is like so broadly accessible to the public as well. Because, these images, these stories that we see of ourselves on screen are ultimately internalized in so many ways. And, I think about growing up and what did I have at that age in terms of representations of my people on screen. I had like Dances with Wolves, Dance Me Outside, kind of like the obvious ones that came from non-Indigenous creators. Like Dance Me Outside is a really important film just in terms of Indigenous representation on screen, but it came from W.P. Kinsella and Bruce McDonald, who are both white men. And I started to think about that film in particular yesterday, and I was like, it's a highly celebrated film, but it's also a really sad film. It's about a young Indigenous woman being murdered and this young friend group's response to that. And I think about like, man, if that's a film that I like celebrated and watched over and over again as like a 11, 12-year-old girl, what sort of like narrative am I internalizing, and what sort of feelings is that giving me in terms of my own self-identity as a young Indigenous girl? And so to know that Inuit youth can watch Slashback and see this like incredibly empowering representation of themselves that's like joyful to watch, that's like hopeful, and also just a celebration of who they are and where they come from, like that's such a remarkable thing. And I think it's going to have this like beautiful ripple effect for years to come. And I don't even care that it like, there's these like such like obvious critiques of the film, like, oh, the monster is not good enough. I don't care. I think the monster was super scary. And I think it's just like so cool. Like, when have you ever seen a group of like 4 Inuit girls fight aliens and use Inuit technology and language and culture and like literally like save the day? I think that's so special. Nyla is such a badass for making that film, and like I think it's such an important thing, not only for Inuit youth, but for Indigenous youth as a whole. And the fact that it played at South by Southwest is also like super cool, because it just means that Indigenous stories, Indigenous films can, hold their place and stand their ground in, huge mainstream festivals like South by Southwest.
Well, and South by Southwest too is like, I mean, it's the less arty, it's the more like hip and cool, right? Like getting into South by Southwest is just like, you're like, I have arrived and I've got like the coolest vibe out here. So yeah, yeah, it's so exciting to see. Those girls are just, like you said, so badass. And the fact that there's like the ones that are like really connected with their culture, and there's the one lead protagonist who's like wants to be a city girl and stuff like that. And it's just, I'm sure that as women and as Indigenous women, it's like you can see yourselves in one or all of those characters at some points in your life, right?
Yeah, definitely. And like the performances of the kids, like they were all so great. And like that's hard to direct, like have one kid be in your thing, but it was like all kids and it's in a remote location, which I know had its own challenges of even I think just housing the crew, if I remember, or feeding the crew. I don't remember what she said, but like it was tough. It was hard to film, and it just turned out so incredible and so fun and so engaging, and like I was on the edge of my seat the whole time. And I also, like Maya, don't care if the monster CGI or whatever could have been better. I bought it, I was all in on it, and I was rooting for them the entire time.
Well, and they say don't work with children or animals, and she worked with both.
Yeah. I think it's like Jeff Barnaby used to talk about this, and I think it's such an important thing to mention, which is that to be a filmmaker inherently means that you probably are coming from privilege. Like it is a privilege to even be able to make a film. And I think that this film kind of speaks to that in terms of the very obvious barriers that maybe aren't so obvious to the rest of Canadian filmmakers, that Nyla and her team faced. Like there's no hotels in Pang, so all of the cast and crew had to stay in schools. They had to bunk up together. And it just costs so much more, and I think it's a reminder that, food security is a massive issue in the North, and just your everyday person can't afford groceries because it's so expensive even to buy the most obvious things at the grocery store. And it really speaks to the inequity that exists in Canada and the deep marginalization of Indigenous people, particularly those who live in the North and remote communities. And to make a film in the North is a huge undertaking, for those reasons, for these like very, very strong issues of inequity and essentially oppression and marginalization that absolutely do not need to exist. The Canadian government can subsidize these things. They can tax the corporations, they can tax gas and oil companies, and they can subsidize food in the North so that people up there aren't having to make these very difficult choices between housing and food and all of that. And so I think the fact that Nyla was able to make this film with all of those barriers is such an important thing. It needs to be celebrated, and it also kind of shines a light on the fact that filmmakers from the North face exceptional barriers, ones that like the rest of us who live in urban settings or in places that we take film for granted, need to be reminded that there are issues in this country that are much deeper than just like getting funding for your film.
Definitely the advantage of shooting in the North is like you can't turn the camera and not get amazing cinematography. Like the North is so beautiful, and when you get to see it in the hands of a great cinematographer too, you're just like, wow, like we definitely need to take care of this. Like this is such opulent, beautiful landscape. And like you said, not everything that those people have to deal with is tragic. Like they live in this beautiful place, they have beautiful community. Most of the stuff that's bad is actually because of people that kind of look like me or my ancestors kind of fucked up for them. If you just leave them alone, and they will take care of themselves. I do like that you brought up Jeff again though, because the use of like specifically Indigenous women in kind of trauma porn situations in film. Jeff's character in Rhymes with Young Ghouls, Elle-Máijá, played by Devilry Jacobs, literally spawned a sociological term that's a litmus test about the appropriate use of Indigenous people or women in the arts. So do they have enough screen time? Do they suffer abuse, sexual or otherwise? And it's just like, fuck, man, this guy on this very small amount of time on the planet just is like fucking kicking doors open and just like flamethrower and shit, like the end of like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's remarkable to think about like this long history of the same narrative of Indigenous women, both in literature and film and the arts, wherein we are the product of suffering. Like suffering is the core identity of so many characters we see in literature and on screen, in terms of Indigenous women and the way we're presented to the world. And that comes from a whole lot of non-Indigenous people telling stories about us. And so I think when we talk about narrative sovereignty and screen sovereignty for Indigenous people, those stories will inherently change when it's us telling our own stories, when it's us creating characters for the world to see that actually represent the women we know in our communities and the two-spirit people and the non-binary people that we know in our communities, because we are not just these, tragic monolithic characters. And that's so special. And we see that in Slashback, like to see these 4 young girls who are all so different, but who are so real. Like, I feel like I was watching myself at that age. I felt like I was watching my young nieces at that, and what they're facing. They're so modern and funny, but also so proud of who they are and where they come from. And also just like, facing the standard existential challenges of tweens, which is so cool to see, because it's like so rarely, I think, do Indigenous youth get to see these sort of beautifully authentic representations of themselves on screen, and to feel seen and heard is such an important thing.
Mary, as a young Indigenous actor as well, what, she had Dances with Wolves. What did you have? Like you're much younger, so you had better representation, I'm hoping.
I don't know if I'm much younger, but I appreciate that you think that. But my representation, the only thing I glommed onto in my youth was Pocahontas. And then,
really? Oh, wow.
Pocahontas. I was like, I am Pocahontas. And little did I know at that time that that is actually a tragic story of our first stolen sister. And it's that is the only thing that I could see myself in. And that is not a good representation at all. It's very stereotypical, and and they didn't tell it accurately of the true story of who that's actually based off of. So yeah, that's what I had.
So, but now you have like stuff like Slashback or Res Dogs. Like Res Dogs is hilarious. Like that, all those young actors are just killing it in Hollywood too.
Oh yeah, it's incredible. And I really am enjoying the shift now that the Indigenous stories are taking, where it is branching out from telling the like tough part of our truth and our history. We're starting to see things like Slashback, where we get to just be cool characters telling fun stories. Like I think there's a really important part of our storytelling, which is telling the hard truths of what has happened to us, and all of the tragedies that are in the community. That is such an important part of our voices being heard. But I'm really liking the now sort of next wave of getting to tell our stories, where it's not about that at all. It's just about telling an entertaining story and reaching, I feel like, broader audiences, and just seeing ourselves on screen in many different ways.
It's amazing what happens when you let people tell their own stories.
Incredible. Yeah, like there's this authenticity that I didn't know was there.
Yeah, I wonder why my characters aren't 3-dimensional, because I have no idea of what those characters really went through, right? So
Yeah.
do you guys have anything else you want to talk about Slashback, or work that you have coming up, or anything like that? Like I said, like I could just pick your guys' brains forever. There's so much institutional knowledge on my screen right now, as a filmmaker myself, to just learn from. So
No, I'm just excited that we got to talk about Slashback a little bit, and I really hope people watch it. It's available on Crave in Canada. And I think it's still on like Air Canada flights, if you're lucky enough to have a screen. And yeah, it's just been an honor to chat with you guys. And Mary, I'm so excited for all of your new projects. You're just like so busy, and it's so good to hear. Yeah.
Oh, same to you. I cannot wait for Little Bird. We didn't even talk about Little Bird.
Oh yeah. Oh, actually, Little Bird, the DP I worked with on Little Bird is named Guy Godfrey, and Guy shot Slashback. So I got to hear from Guy about his experiences of shooting in Pang, and how honored he was as a settler Canadian to be able to go to the north and work on this incredible film, and to be faced with like sort of the challenges that filmmakers face when working in the north, and how the crew just sort of, for the most part, was like very keen to just make it happen and roll with the punches. And yeah, I'm really glad I had the chance to work with Guy on Little Bird, and just to hear about his work on Slashback with Nyla.
And when does that come out, or when's the release date for that?
Little Bird will be available on Crave in Canada May 26th, I believe.
Okay. Hey, quick question before you go though. What was it like working with Amanda Plummer?
Oh gosh, she was so fantastic. She is like, honestly, when you meet someone and it feels like they're kind of like channeling something from like another sort of dimension in a way that's like almost spiritual. It was like she was kind of like bursting with this creativity that she had no control over. Like it's purely natural, and she just works from this like really instinctual place that I think a lot of actors really just dream of being able to do in front of the camera. And she's so generous and kind and funny and weird in the best way. Honestly, I learned a lot just working with her, and I was kind of like a little bit starstruck the first time I met her, because I was like, oh my God, you're Amanda Plummer. But she was like, had no ego, was so amazing. And she, generally when you finish a project, you like ask to take something from the set or from your wardrobe, just as like a little keepsake, and usually production will agree to that. And her character had this cat, who was like really not actually a very friendly cat. It had a handler, but it would like always like scratch and bite and stuff. But there was this like really funny like kitsch painting of a cat in her shack that she lived in, and Amanda just like really wanted to take that cat painting home. So that's what she ended up taking home. Of like, out of everything she could have taken, she wanted this like thrift store, like 1970s terrible cat painting. And yeah, anyway, it was wonderful to work with her. I learned so much, and she's just like such a gifted actor in so many ways.
What did you take?
What did I take? Oh my God, what did I take? I feel like I took a piece of clothing. I'll usually take like one wardrobe piece, and I have this kind of like whole collection in my closet of one piece of wardrobe from everything I've worked on.
So by the end of your career, you'll be the eclectic person taking the weird cat painting home or something
Yeah,
like that.
yeah, I'll run out of space in my closet. I feel like I should take a cue from Amanda and start taking pieces of the set instead.
I have my favorite mug is a mug from Ruthless Souls, and I just like when the props person gave it to me, I made such a big deal about, oh my God, this is the perfect mug. And then at the end, she was like, here, I think you should take this. Yes.
You guys can just like steal stuff, right? Like nobody, once production's done, most of that stuff nobody gives a shit about. So
yeah. That's the white man way.
Yeah.
I mean, if the shoe fits. Listen, both of you, thank you so much for coming on the show. I feel so blessed and lucky that I got to be here and interview both of you. Again, Mary, you're always welcome on the show. Both of you are always welcome. I'm so glad to have Mary back again. I'm so glad you were here to talk with. You've noticed I've been avoiding saying your name because I don't want to fuck it up.
It's all story of my life.
So yeah, and then in our show notes, we'll put as many links so people can see your work and all that type of stuff. Because like our show is all about just getting independent filmmakers and stuff out to the world. The one advantage of the podcast is it's kind of really inexpensive way. And listen, no one has seen a middle-aged white man do a film podcast yet. We're breaking new ground here. So.
And thank you for having me. It was so wonderful to get to talk to you, Maya. And Chris, always a joy to see you too. And our deepest condolences to Scott and his family. And just Heichka, I raise my hands to both of you and to all the listeners for being here and celebrating Indigenous, female, badass filmmaking. That is Elle-Máijá Tailfeathers.
Oh, thank you. Same.
Yeah, and all of those things will always have a really important place here on our podcast. Like I said, we love to showcase Indigenous women and their filmmaking or LGBTQ or anything. Like, fucking break the patriarchy, tear it all down, rebuild it, because it comes back better. So
awesome.
All right, ciao guys.
All right, thank you.
And that is our wrap for the day. Please like and subscribe to this podcast. Tell your friends. If you want to get a hold of us, reach us at the www.howdyoulikethatmovie.com.
Poor Scott. So I just did my Oscar show. I had 2 really great guests on for that. And we ran like an hour and 45 minutes. This is going to be another hour or something. And so Scott was messaging me while we were talking. He's just like, so what I'm taking is you have way more fun when I'm not there. So. Production by Rod Shaver, Vader Monkey Productions.